sign إذا أوكي ونبتدي. السلام عليكم. تمام الصوت. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism's session panel on influencing policy action for positive change. This panel has gathered policymakers, legislators from various stakeholders in the Kingdom of Bahrain to discuss policies implemented that contribute to building a healthy entrepreneurship ecosystem to stimulate the growth and development of SMEs. SMEs have been identified as a vital sector in Bahrain's economy, representing 98% of the total number of local companies, and it has been a key growth driver in economic diversification. However, local SMEs and entrepreneurs have faced a number of challenges related to their growth and expansion. Some of the challenges identified includes access to finance, physical expansion, infrastructure, level of technology, regulatory framework, access to information and advice, access to market, business development services, technical and managerial skills. Therefore, the policymakers have initiated a growth-oriented policy that have a progressive achievement on entrepreneurial ecosystem. Here to discuss these growth-oriented policies, I'm privileged to first introduce one of the Bahrain's leading SME policymakers, Ms. Sheikh Al-Fadl. Ms. Sheikh Al-Fadl is the Director of Small and Medium Enterprise Development in the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism. Ms. Sheikha works on developing policies to improve SMEs' level participation in the national economy, as well as coordinated between numerous stakeholders related to developing the ecosystem in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Ms. Sheikha, welcome, and it's great to have you on this panel today. When we talk about SMEs and entrepreneurship policies on a national level, could you elaborate on how these policies are being initiated?
Thank you, Sabah. First of all, I would like just to give you a small presentation to tell a story about SMEs and how it was a point of focus in Bahrain, and in order to further develop this vital sector in the kingdom, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, in addition to their stakeholders, have initiated the SMEs Development Strategy with the directives of His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince. If you don't mind, just if you can, with the presentation, as you see in the presentation that the SMEs represent 98% of the commercial registrations in the Kingdom of Bahrain, and major percentage of youth that owns those CRs in addition to women. It is a job creator. The SME sector is vital, and we need to encourage those youth to innovate, to be creative, to access new markets, and therefore, in order for them, because we believe that youth is the engine for economic development. Therefore, we've put a very, let's say, ambitious KPIs that represents three major KPIs in order to improve SME's contribution to the economic development in cooperation with the Economic Development Board, our major stakeholder. So our major KPIs was to improve the SME's contribution in the gross domestic GDP, gross domestic income, from 30% to 40% within 5 years, and to increase the contribution within the sector from 36,000 employees to 43,000 employees in Bahraini national local employment, in addition to exports. Which represent currently 8%, and the ministry has put a major KPI, which is to increase it from 8% to 20% within the coming 5 years. So as you see here, that our major stakeholders is the Economic Development Board, Bahrain Chamber of Commerce, the Bahrain Development Bank, and of course our, let's say, backup, which is the most influenced partner, Temkin. During the past, let's say, since the inception of the SMEs Development Board, Bahrain has, or the board has achieved major achievements, and I want to highlight in here Export Bahrain, which was a major achievement done in cooperation with Temkin to improve the SMEs' ability to access new markets and improve their, let's say, knowledge to have the required skills to access new markets. And what have been achieved as well, and my other partners will collaborate further in the bankruptcy law, which has been finalized last year, in order to give the entrepreneur the let's say, opportunity when they fail to start or restart again their project to have the required time. Moreover, the minimal viable products, which is a fund of BD up to BD 10,000 for let's say, for prototypes to improve the entrepreneurs' access to finance to design their prototypes for specific products. In addition to the Bahrain investment market, which is the first market that has been initiated specifically for those companies with a capital of not less than 250,000. And I have just forgot to mention that the SMEs definition in the Kingdom of Bahrain, it starts from companies with 0 employment to 100 employees, and from 0 BD to 3 million BD as a turnover. So the definition of an SME goes up to 3 million BD, which is similar to Oman's definition mostly, in order to focus on certain companies that requires further development. Our let's say, strategy, very ambitious, and we've achieved major initiatives, but we have other initiatives coming within the next 3 years, starting in 2019. The major and the most, let's say, important initiatives is the SMEs procurement. As per His Royal Highness, the Prime Minister, 20% of government procurement have been dedicated to SMEs. We are working very closely with the governments and other ministries to make sure that the procurement will have their stake within the government procurement. Made in Bahrain is one major initiative that we are working closely with Export Bahrain to promote Made in Bahrain products. Those 2 initiatives is expected to be launched this year. The SMEs registration website, which will be a registration website in order for SMEs to register, to be eligible for other beneficial, or to be eligible for those initiatives. And I'm proud to say that the SMEs registration website have been finalized, and today we will be able, as a ministry, to receive applications through our SMEs registration website. Thank you.
Ms. Sheikha, could you brief us about the SMEs registration website, and what exactly would the company or startup would benefit from registering in the website?
In order to make sure that the company is not a large company, the company do contribute positively in the economy, and it is eligible as per the SMEs definition, we have created the SMEs registration. The company will have to provide income statement to prove that their annual turnover doesn't exceed 3 million, or doesn't exceed 1 million, or doesn't exceed 100,000, since we will have specific programs for each category, which is for the micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Thank you very much. Alongside the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, the Economic Development Board is a strategic partner and a very important stakeholder in the SDB. Here with us today from the EDB, I'm delighted to introduce my next speaker, Ms. Bethaina Amin, Director of Legal Affairs at the Bahrain Economic Development Board, the EDB, Bahrain EDB, which is responsible for managing the legal responsibilities and collaboratively delivering best practice in the strategic development and enhancing the kingdom's regulatory system. Ms. Bethaina, as Bahrain's implemented a series of legislative reforms to create further developed business-friendly environment, could you provide some of the key examples?
First of all, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you everybody here with us today for taking the time to be with us. Yes, Bahrain has actually and has always been very keen to present itself as very forward-thinking. We have always had a very robust regulatory framework in place, but what we always strive to do is to continue to develop that aspect. So 2018 was actually very key for that, for us here in Bahrain, and we introduced a series of new legislative reforms. Just to name but a few examples on why they're quite important to facilitate the business environment here in Bahrain, we have recently had the electronic communications and transactions law and also the electronic transferable records law that was introduced last year. Both of them were based on the UNICITRAL model e-commerce laws, and Bahrain is actually the first country globally to introduce the the transferable records law. You also have introduced last year, it's going to be coming into effect August of this year, is the Personal Data Protection Act. So what that does is that it gives a data subject rights over its personal data, but it also creates a very clear and transparent framework for businesses that are looking at harnessing data of their customers and how they can utilize that to best benefit their businesses, but also their consumers at the same time. The law is intended to increase FDI. It's intended to actually promote cross-border data flows. And that is the intention behind a lot of the laws that have been introduced in Bahrain overall, is to facilitate the digital economy that we're striving to achieve and implement here, but also to make it in a way simpler for businesses to conduct their businesses in a very clear and transparent manner. And one of the other laws that I think is very key for Bahrain, and as Sheikha has just mentioned briefly just a short while ago, is the new insolvency and restructuring law that was introduced last year. It actually came into effect December 2018. We've got a series of live cases underway. It's a very exciting law actually for us, because what it does is that it shifts the mindset around startups, around failure. It decriminalizes failure, because what it does is that it allows for the restructuring element, which is broadly based on Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the United States. It's broadly accepted to be best practice and what's implemented generally, and what the new bankruptcy law has intended to do is to accept and incorporate a lot of the best practices that people would be familiar with, and businesses. And obviously not everybody wants to go in thinking of failure, but what this law does specifically is that it allows for businesses, as Sheikha mentioned, is to restructure and come back into the market even stronger if they wish to do so. And for any economy that's looking at developing entrepreneurship and innovation, one of the key aspects is, among its robust and solid regulatory framework, it needs a pillar of that. A pillar of that is the bankruptcy law. It needs to be strong, but it has to be flexible. It has to be able to actually provide businesses with the opportunity to actually go back and come back even stronger to market, as opposed to having to go to straight liquidation, as had previously been the case.
I believe Bahrain and the EDB mainly are motivated to create the region's leading startup ecosystem. Could you further discuss this motive?
Yes, the Startup Bahrain initiative had been created a while back. It wasn't just an EDB, it's a real community of startups and also government stakeholders. Bahrain, I think, has always been naturally seen as the gateway to the Gulf, with its very business-friendly environments, with allowing 100% foreign ownership in most activities as well. But also, as you would see in any thriving startup ecosystem, you have a lot of those aspects here available in Bahrain, whether it's the regulatory framework, the mentorship, the funding, the corporate presence, or even the local talent workforce, which is really key for a lot of the businesses here in Bahrain, is that our workforce is educated and it is capable of undertaking a lot of the roles that people would like to see in the businesses that are being established here. But also, what you see in Bahrain, which we're also very proud of, is the Team Bahrain spirit, where you actually see the combination of the different stakeholders involved in the ecosystem. So whether it's the incubators, the accelerators, or even the government stakeholders like MOIC, EDB, Tamkeen, all working together to actually create an ecosystem, an environment that facilitates the business for startups. And actually, another key example for that, Bahrain is a small market in itself.
Yes.
So we actually try and use that to our advantage, in the sense that if you want to test your product, it's actually a very simple, easy place to do that. It's small, so you actually can go from start to implementation quite quickly. One of those spaces that we actually see it quite often happening is in the regulatory sandbox that was implemented with the CBB. CBB is a unitary regulator. It's very forward-thinking. It has established a fintech unit as well. But the regulatory sandbox is specifically actually allows for any company, whether local or international, to come to Bahrain, set up in the regulatory sandbox in a less regulated space to be able to test their innovative products. You've also got the crowdfunding regulations, which are open to Sharia compliant and conventional financing. And you've also got what has recently been established, it's just had its first year anniversary, Bahrain FinTech Bay, which is the largest co-working space as well for fintech startups in the region. So there's a lot of policies that have been implemented in Bahrain that try and facilitate the startup community here.
And I believe, as Ms. Sheikh has stated, with the creation of the SDB, it became more easy, and it's the main driver for completing those initiatives.
Well, there's a lot that happens actually together, and it's that collaboration, collaboration between all the entities and all the stakeholders, whether it's private sector or government, that actually try and make it happen.
Unifying all the efforts. Thank you, Ms. Bethaina. Moving to my next speaker, Dr. Muhammad Ismail is a legal consultant at the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, is also the president of the High Court Appeal. Dr. Muhammad, in May 2018, the competition law was introduced. Could you please brief us about it?
Yes. Thank you for the invitation to this event, and thanks a lot for Ms. Sheikha for her impressive presentation, and for Bosaina for her remarkable analysis. I believe that we have plenty of economic legislation which were promulgated in the current years, consistent with the vision towards shifting from reliance on oil and gas on the economy, and shifting towards digital economy on one hand. On the other hand, all economic legislation and regulatory framework as well, they are all consistent with 2030 vision and the Sustainable Development Goals. So we are achieving remarkable steps towards the 2030 vision, consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals. Competition law is a remarkable legislative step towards more protection, further protection to free market economy. It promotes the mechanisms of free market economy in a more liberal perspective. Competition economy does not mean that the state will interfere on economic and private law relations, not at all. As the eminent economist Adam Smith pointed out in the 19th century, that the role of the state is confined to police, judiciary, and defense. That's it. So the state is only a regulator, but within some very minor and precise legislative mechanisms, such as, in some countries, anti-dumping laws, competition laws, and I believe that the role of the state is only confined to legislation and regulatory framework, policies, I mean, legislation which does not interfere in economic life, in private law relations. Furthermore, you can see also that there are significant legislative enhancements in all Arab countries, in particular in Bahrain, in economic legislation, which is, it clarifies and signifies the influence of the legal globalization phenomena to the legislation in Bahrain. As we all know, globalization is not confined to movement of individuals or capital or commodities, but it has broad meaning, as flow of culture is the most important and imminent angle of globalization. So further enhancements in the economic legislation in Bahrain reflects clearly the influence of legal globalization upon legislation in Bahrain, how the economic legislation and regulatory framework, in particular, some policies, they are promoting the inflow of foreign direct investments to Bahrain. How can, through legislation and regulatory framework, how can we increase the GDP, gross domestic production, at the Kingdom of Bahrain? So I assume that the competition law is one of the most important fundamental tools which the Bahraini legislature has implemented currently to protect free market economy without any interference from the state in private law relations. As I pointed out, the state here, the role of the state is confined to its basic role, as Adam Smith pointed out, we are only regulator.
Dr. Mohammed, Ms. Bethaina as well mentioned the bankruptcy law. And I believe in 2012 as well, the bankruptcy law was introduced. And how did that complement the competition law?
Both laws are two sides to the same coin. I mean that both laws are directly relevant to the economic portfolio and the economic legislation which Kingdom of Bahrain is adopting in the current years, as I pointed out, to achieve the main pillars of the new vision, which is, those pillars are, firstly, shifting from reliance on oil and gas to digital economy. 2, how to achieve 2030 vision. 3, how to be consistent in the previous 2 steps while achieving the previous 2 steps with the sustainable development goals, in addition to how to promote the increase of FDI to the Kingdom of Bahrain, how to increase the GDP. I can see also that both legislation, competition law, and bankruptcy law, they are adopting new perspectives and they are consistent with the international legislation worldwide. You can see that the bankruptcy law, as Ms. Bethaina pointed out, is similar to Chapter 11 of US bankruptcy law, is also similar and consistent with the new legislative approach of the UK law in insolvency. There is a particular chapter in bankruptcy. So I believe that the bankruptcy law as well as the competition law, both legislation are consistent with the international legislative approaches at the UK and at the USA. This is on one hand. On the other hand, both legislation, bankruptcy law and competition law reflect how far the Bahraini legislature was influenced by the forces of the legal globalization. I mean, there is a great influence from common law jurisdictions to civil law legal systems, France and all Arab countries, which were influenced to a great extent by the legal globalization in many legislations, such as not only bankruptcy law and competition, but you can see it also in arbitration law. Bahrain 2015, Oman 1997, Saudi Arabia 2012, Qatar 2017, and United Arab Emirates 2018. I mean, all Arab legislation has influenced by the, in terms of arbitration, they were influenced by ancestral model law as amended. So the legal globalization, it has very, I mean, remarkable influence upon the legislation in Bahrain, which is consistent with the new economic vision towards 2030 vision. I can add also that the bankruptcy law, I'd like to link it to the topic of the conference, which is how far both legislation, bankruptcy law and competition law, introduce a threshold, higher threshold of protection to SMEs. And this is impliedly or directly, it's not impliedly, I mean, it's direct influence or direct achievement of a higher protection to foreign direct investments as well as national direct investments at the Kingdom of Bahrain. We can see that in Article 191 of the bankruptcy law, there are special procedures for SMEs in case of bankruptcy, and the main target, the main aim of those procedures is to protect, to offer higher threshold of protection to SMEs, by which in Article 191, the concerned minister, which is His Excellency Minister of Industry and Commerce, may issue, which is, His Excellency Minister of Sheikh Khalid Al Khalifa, Minister of Justice, after consultation with His Excellency Minister of Industry and Commerce, they may promulgate an administrative decree to form a committee which represents the private sector in order to offer financial subsidy to SMEs to cover the costs and fees of the bankruptcy procedures, because sometimes it's very difficult for the SMEs to offer procedures for and fees the procedures for bankruptcy, and also to offer financial subsidy and assistance to debtors who do not have enough assets or who do not have secured assets for bankruptcy. And also the Article 191 highlights the financial resources and how can the committee get financial resources after the approval of the cabinet. Those are, I believe, those are procedural steps at Article 191. Meanwhile, the competition law contains substantive protection. So if you can find a procedural protection at Article 199 of the bankruptcy law, on the other hand, at the competition law, you can find a very clear and precise substantive protection which offers a higher threshold of protection to SMEs. In Article 5 of the competition law, there are an exception from all measures and precautions which the government may offer, which MOICT may offer to protect the market from any negative interference which affects negatively competition. Those all measures are small and micro establishments are small enterprises, and micro enterprises are accepted from those measures which are stipulated in Article 3 of the competition law. The ministry, MOICT, through an administrative decree which has to be issued by His Excellency the Minister of Industry and Commerce, this decree shall highlight the scope of exception, the duration, there is a cap or a ceiling for this exception, and the draft decree which we have prepared at MOICT, we stipulated 3 years for this exception, subject to renewal by His Excellency through an administrative decree. What are the stipulations for a small or micro enterprise to get benefit from this exception? And how can MOICT deprive any small or micro enterprise from this exception? What are the stipulations? And for instance, for public interest considerations, which is one of the main concepts. Sorry about that. One of the main concepts of the administrative law anywhere, because the main target of the administrative law is to achieve public interests and to protect public interests and public funds. Finally, last point, I would like to add that by way of analogy, MOICT on the draft decree concludes that in Article 5, where the legislation stipulates an exception for small enterprises, okay, and it didn't mention micro enterprises, so it impliedly means that we can offer the same threshold of protection to small enterprises and micro enterprises at the administrative decree, as it goes without saying. In Arabic we say من باب الأولى في مناهج التفسير, okay, which is in English impliedly if the legislation stipulates an exception for small enterprises, we can extend the same exception to micro enterprises without an explicit provision at the legislation itself.
So, Dr. Mohammed, I believe these laws are all introduced to be in favor with the SMEs and provide support for SMEs as well.
Indeed, both legislation are in favor of the SMEs.
Yes.
Procedural and substantive.
Yeah, thank you very much for the valuable information. I'll move now to our final speaker. Of course, no SME development policy is complete without engaging the private sector. Therefore, we're glad to have among us today Mr. Bassem Sa'i. Mr. Bassem Sa'i is an entrepreneur that led a few startups with his experience spanning over 30 years, has a strong strategic thinking qualities and ability to create alternative ways, capability to spot relevant patterns and issues in various scenarios, able to see clearly in cloud-lead situations, and can look at a bigger picture. Mr. Bassem Sa'i, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us more about how the private sector coordinates with governments and civil governments to enact policies on entrepreneurship and SMEs?
Thank you for this very elaborate introduction. First, I think it's important for us to put context to what I was about to share, is where did we come from, where we are, and where we're going. In our region, post the oil boom of the 1970s, the private sector was the main engine that was driving the economy. After the boom of the oil since the 70s, the wealth that was accumulated by the states gave them the power to be the major drivers of the economy. And with that came the ability to make decisions and the authority to implement things, which was something that was needed because we were building our countries and our region, the infrastructure, building the cities, the whole ecosystem. Now we are entering a phase where the authorities are stepping back and trying to empower the private sector to play a bigger role in the development. So they're moving from a decision-making and an authority to a regulator. Now this takes time, and for this to really materialize in a healthy way, a mindset has to be changed on both sides, because the authorities would have to engage more in being a listener rather than implementing decisions with an authority. So this is a long process that we are going through it. We understand it. Both sides understand it, but it's a process that we're going through. The most important thing is that the future for the whole region, and for us even in Bahrain, is the private sector. Now, the private sector will always find a way to succeed, but we need to prepare the fertile ground and the equal opportunity and the legislation that allows the private sector to compete, to grow, and to prosper. Now, during this period, there are certain organizations that play a vital role to enhance this stage, because that stage is very critical. Now, NGOs play a very big role. I'm a proud owner of, not owner, but a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. I've been a member since 2006. And I still say to people that I consider it as one of the best business decisions of my life to join EO, because EO has helped me so much as an entrepreneur to develop my skills, to develop my abilities, to improve my understanding of dealing with certain situations. And it was vital for me to grow my business to where it is today. So NGOs are a very, very important part of the ecosystem that we need to have a vibrant private sector. So they are very, very critical and important. And then YPO is, again, the same organization. And there are many other organizations. The reason I mentioned these two, because these are international organizations and they are very well known. On the other side, we have in the region chambers of commerce. Chambers of commerce, they represent the whole private sector. And for us in Bahrain, everybody that has a commercial registration basically is a member of the Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce today is the most influential representative and protector and defender of the private sector. And in Bahrain, the Chamber of Commerce being, this year they celebrated the 80th anniversary. It is one of the oldest in the region, and it has a lot of recognition among the authorities from the highest level as the voice of the private sector. And we have been having a very positive and constructive relationship with the authorities, especially with the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, where there's a great relationship. We disagree, sometimes we argue, but that's fine. But we always reach a decision, we reach a conclusion. And this is very vital because recently the Chamber and the Ministry have worked together. We disagreed, but we worked together in the end, and we came up with a solution that was good for everybody. It was a win-win for everybody. So this is the way forward, because again, like I said before, the government or the authorities have been used to taking decisions, but now the new era would depend on all of us, on the authorities to listen more and for us to engage more. But one thing very important is that we have to get away from the classical way of just pointing problems. We need to come up with also proposals for solutions, okay? Because that mindset also that we have in the private sector has to change. Because right now, it's always people bringing up problems and expecting the authorities to find a solution. And then when they come up with a solution, they complain. So that mindset has to change. We as a private sector have to drive the change, have to engage, but not just bring the problems, but also propose solutions. So the role on that in the future depends on both sides to work closely together and to work in unison. The other thing which is very important is we need to inject private sector people and spirit in the authorities. And in Bahrain, I think we are lucky because the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism came from the private sector. So he comes with a mindset of understanding what the private sector is going through, and we need to build on that, and we need to embrace more at bringing people from the private sector in decision making and working in collaboration with the authorities and also representing the authorities. So that's basically how I see the future forward.
Bassem, I want just to comment on your what you have stated, that I think the private sector is a vital, let's say, It's the backbone of our policy making right now. We will not make a policy as a government or as, let's say, as Ministry of Industry and Commerce and specifically the SMEs Development Board without consulting it with the private sector and specifically the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce. I was with an expert a few months back and he stated I was in a session that is related to innovation. And he stated that we will come to a day that the private sector, those who will be putting the policies, specifically with innovation, when we see some innovative ideas that we can't control, specifically for those applications. I saw an application for a guy that sells food items from home without having let's say, he is not regulated. And I was against the idea how he will be regulated, how we will make sure that his product is not harmful to the clients. And this expert, he told me something. He told me it went out and the clients and the consumers are buying and purchasing from those applications without even being regulated. So I think, as he stated, we are in a new era, and revising all those policy very continuously from time to time. This is what will help us to make our ecosystem more creative, innovative, and nurturing to our startups and SMEs.
I'm also well aware, being part of Sheikh Al Fadl's team, that no policy is being created without engaging the private sector as well. And with that being said, I'd like to thank Mr. Sai. And thank you, Ms. Sheikha and Ms. Bethayna, Ms. Dr. Muhammad. And I believe the audience learned a lot today on how the SMEs targeting policies are being developed in Bahrain and how various stakeholders engage together in creating these policies. Thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of the Congress. Thank you. We have time for questions and answers. Any questions from mic? Sorry, the mic is over there.
And, my name is Arnab Chakraborty. I represent a technical assistance program of the United Nations in India. It's called Emprotect. And I was wondering, we have a value chain development approach in India when it comes to entrepreneurship development, with the private sector, transnational corporations sitting on top of the value chain, and then SMEs being fixed at various levels around the value chain, and contracts being set up between entrepreneurs at various levels. Do you have such an approach here, a multi-stakeholder and a multidisciplinary approach to developing value chains rather than clusters where it's a free-for-all at the end of the day, and it's a good amount of competition that happens, most of which ends up in dissipative, forces. And anyone could take this, please.
Your point is, I think it's totally. I agree with you. We have actually received a lot of feedback from the SMEs regarding this specific point. But as I stated earlier, we have a cabinet resolution for dedicating 20% of the government procurement to SMEs and startups. We have another initiatives which is coming, let's say 1 year from now, the subcontracting. And the subcontracting is for the large companies, giving the opportunity to smaller companies. And this will help the economy as well, because we will substitute the imports to the Kingdom of Bahrain. We will give those opportunities, and instead of exporting those products or importing those products, we will give the opportunity to small companies to develop and those large companies to purchase from them. But yet we don't have it. We need the private sector to be more aware, to know that this will assist job creation, this will assist the development of small industries. This is a great point. I think we will need to go to India and learn from you, because you're the expert and the top in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight, for the information given to us. You've all mentioned the importance of the SMEs for the economy. And I do agree with you, definitely. And the KPIs which you set for yourselves are really challenging. And I was told that the minister was insisting on this, 20% by 2021. I hope you achieve that. And we, as a private sector, will be willing to help. I'm also in the Chamber of Commerce and Industrial Committee, sitting there, and we had a meeting with the minister. We brought out a few challenges which face the industry. Now, I would like to ask you, Sheikha, Al-Waha Fund of funds, how is this going to help the SMEs? I believe it's put there for VCs from outside the country to come here and use this to invest into regional startups. You know, if you can elaborate on that, that's for you. Do you think the regulators are moving at the same speed at the as the EDB visionary policies? If you can elaborate on that. On the competition, I am law. Where is it that protecting the local industry, whereby we have to compare apple to apple, right? So if Saudi is a larger market and they have a lot of benefits, the land is cheaper, the utilities are cheaper, they produce product, and they come to Bahrain, they have the same opportunities which the local people have, and their prices are more competitive. How can I be competitive? So there should be a protection for local manufacturing. So it's not fair. If you want to be fair, you have to give me the same facility which are given to the Saudi sector in Saudi. And of course, me and Basim are from the EO also.
Regarding the fund of funds, yes, it's a capital of $100 million that is being invested in venture capitals, and those venture capitals has to be centered in Bahrain. The entity which is responsible about the fund of funds is Bahrain Development Bank. I'm not the right person to give feedback about fund of funds, but it's not targeting SMEs, it's targeting startups. The SMEs Development Board takes into its umbrella all the initiatives that is related to both startups and SMEs. Since we have 5 themes, which is access to finance, access to market, skills development, streamlining policy, and fostering innovation. When we speak about startups, we are targeting fostering innovation. And those venture capital, let's say, that will be located in Bahrain, it will give local, even Bahrainis, local businesses the opportunity to be next to them if they have an idea that requires investment. And those startups who will discover, or let's say who will have the opportunity to get a fund from the fund of funds, can be centered here in Bahrain, specifically with all those facilities that we have within our ecosystem, and this will eventually create jobs and value added to our economy. Thanks.
Is it my turn now? Okay. So just to repeat your question, are the regulators moving as fast as the other entities in Bahrain with respect to development of policy and legislation? And I think we are at a very unique period of time, and not just in Bahrain, but also globally, where innovation is just fast outpacing regulation. That is something that you can see on a global stage. Bahrain is not unique to developing regulations post certain events or developments. Saying that and putting that to one side, I actually think Bahrain itself has put forward quite a few legislative reforms, some of which I've mentioned earlier. And in all of that respect, we always try and work very closely with the regulators. And it doesn't work if you don't listen to the industry. As Boston said, it has to be fit for purpose. It has to work for the industry. And the regulators have to understand why it actually, and they do, how it fits into their current processes. So one of those examples that we've seen is the personal data protection law. So you see GDPR in the EU, how far-reaching it is, and then you see it being implemented to a certain degree in Bahrain. The PDPL, as I'm just going to call it for sake of shortness, is actually based on the old EU directive. And it facilitates that governance over data protection for the data subject and also for businesses. And the question is asked, well, why do we need it? What you're actually seeing time and time again, actually on an international level as well, is businesses are asking for that form of transparency. Development of these laws and regulations are following innovation, but they are crucial to allow that innovation to even go further. So I hope I've answered your question in that sense. I think what we always do as collaborative teamwork in Bahrain, and I think we're very proud of that. Innovation will never wait for regulations, but it's also very difficult to sometimes foresee what it is that's required. So then another example to that is something else that was promulgated in Bahrain. It's the data jurisdictions law. That's quite new. It's actually first of its class. It allows for data from outside of Bahrain to be put in data centers here in Bahrain, but they retain the original jurisdiction of that country of origin. That's quite new. It's a very short law. It actually governs that specific point, but that's because it's a point that keeps coming up, and it's the issue of data localization and data protection stance that you see in different jurisdictions. Now, you wouldn't know that you need a law like that until you actually see the effects of certain innovations that allow to identify those gaps. And it's always, I think, our role collaboratively to actually from the industry to raise these issues, but also, as Bassem said, for us to listen and to see how we can work together to address those gaps. And I think from what we've seen so far in the last few years as well, Bahrain has always been forward thinking that way, and we always continue to strive to do that as well.
Regarding your legal query, okay, if you allow me, I would like to rephrase it, okay, in a short sentence. You pointed out that how far is a national investor, a Bahraini investor, is protected, okay, by legislative mechanisms in competition law against foreign investors, whether Saudi or any other, okay? I'll tell you, very critical situation in all countries. Do you know that a foreign investor, any foreigner, has a higher threshold of protection than Bahraini investor in Bahrain, than Egyptian investor in Egypt, than German investor in his home country in Germany? I'll tell you why. Because if there is a bilateral investment treaty, a BIT, okay, and there are, as the UNCTAD pointed out, there are more than 3,700, as far as I remember, bilateral investment treaties worldwide, okay? Egypt only has signed until 2007 175 bilateral investment treaties. Bahrain has plenty, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all world, all the countries, they have signed bilateral investment treaties which offer a higher threshold of protection to foreign investor than the national investor. I'll tell you why, because any foreign investor can access to the exit arbitration, for instance. Meanwhile, the national investor, he has only to recourse to the national courts, unless he has an arbitration agreement. Okay, so all countries, even the UK, Germany, the United States, they all offer a higher threshold of protection to foreign investors. Why? Because all countries aim at achieving a higher threshold of protection, which promotes the increase of foreign direct investments, the increase of flow of FDI to the countries. Okay, so this is a legislative mechanism through international treaties in all the world. Okay, this is on one hand. So this is a very general statement, maybe not directly relevant to your query, but it shows to you the situation in the whole entire world, by which, where you can find bilateral treaties, okay, to offer higher threshold of protection in international investment law to foreign investor, to encourage him to increase the inward of foreign direct investments. Okay, this is on one hand. Okay, a short answer, which is directly relevant to your query, you can find a protection for national investor in Article 3 and in many articles in the competition law, in Article 8, and in many articles which prohibit. Those articles prohibit any negative exercise or any negative activity at the market by which you can reduce prices to negatively affect competition or raise prices, okay, or offer any stabilization to the prices, to have more market share, which is not true share, exercise any propaganda, negative propaganda through media, okay, to affect the marketing of the products. And in all cases, when any establishment or any enterprise achieves or has a market share more than 40%, okay, for one enterprise, or if two or more enterprises they have a market share more than 60%, we can consider them as controlling and affecting competition. In many countries, you can find also anti-dumping laws, and it's a very effective mechanism to prohibit any company or any enterprise from unilaterally controlling the market. Okay, so I believe that we have a considerable legislative mechanisms to protect any enterprise in the market, whether national or foreigner. Okay, and it doesn't. It offers a higher threshold of protection, a more protection to a national investor through the provisions of the competition law.
Dr. Mohammed, thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. I hope all our panelists were clear enough for your queries, and I believe they will be available for your questions after the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.